I sank onto the edge of our leather couch, the cold cushions pressing against the back of my knees. The late afternoon sun slanted through the living room blinds, painting golden stripes across the room, stripes that felt like bars in a prison cell. Beside me, a neat pile of unopened mail lay waiting, the monthly mortgage statement, 2 credit card bills with interest rates creeping above 20%, an overdue notice from the utility company, and a high-interest car loan statement that seemed to grow by the day. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the faint sting of static electricity. Just a few years ago, Sophia and I were scraping by on minimum wage shifts, sharing an apartment whose rent barely covered the leaky faucet and peeling paint. We laughed then, laughed at our thrift store furniture, our microwave dinners on picnic blankets in the living room. We dreamed big dreams on tight budgets, of one day owning a home, taking real vacations, starting a family of our own. Now here we were, in our dream home, with its white picket fence and 2-car garage. We had landscaped flower beds, a grill for weekend barbecues, and a soft green couch that cost a small fortune. Our life looked perfect on Instagram, but behind the filter, the numbers piled up like an avalanche. Each upgrade had meant another loan, new appliances, a fenced backyard, that hibachi grill Sophia had tentatively begged for last Christmas. My phone buzzed. It was Sophia, sending a selfie from the bedroom, her smiling face framed by soft curls, holding up a tiny pair of baby booties. I felt a pang of longing before reality slammed into me again. I set the phone down. I wanted nothing more than to crush her in my arms, to promise her the world. But I couldn't lie. That evening, over the faint hum of the refrigerator, Sophia set down her glass of white wine and met my gaze. "Ethan," she began, voice trembling just enough to reveal her excitement. "I've been thinking. Really thinking. I feel ready for us to have a baby." My heart clenched. I could almost taste her hope, sweet and urgent. But when I opened my mouth, the words tasted bitter. "A baby?" I echoed, voice tight. "Are you sure?" She nodded, pressing her palm against mine. I'd never been more sure. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my racing thoughts. I pictured a tiny nursery painted pale yellow, a rocking chair swaying softly by the window. I pictured late-night feedings, diapers stacked beside the changing table, baby monitors crackling in the hallway. And then, inevitably, I pictured our bank account, already precarious, bottoming out under another set of expenses. "Sophia," I said softly, "do you remember when we bought this house? We stretched ourselves thin. We refinanced once already." I pointed toward the bills. "Every month, we pay more than we make. If we add another mouth to feed." Her eyes widened, but she didn't speak. The silence that followed felt like the weight of every unpaid bill, every late fee we'd ever incurred. The ticking clock on the mantel seemed to count down to some inevitable collapse. I reached out for her hand, ashamed of the tears I felt rising. "I love you," I whispered. "I want a family with you more than anything. But I'm terrified I'll fail you, fail our child." She squeezed my hand, her grip fierce. "I know it won't be easy," she said, "but I believe in us." I looked into her eyes, the same eyes that had lit up our starlit wedding night, that had comforted me after grueling days, that had celebrated every small victory, and I felt both hope and dread. Outside, the sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening across our perfect, fragile home. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about finances or bills. It was about trust, trusting that our love could weather hardships we couldn't yet see. It was about courage. The courage to step off the edge into a future uncertain, sweet, and terrifying. I exhaled, my breath trembling. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's talk about how we make it work." And as I spoke, The golden stripes on the floor didn't feel like prison bars so much as guideposts leading us, together, into the unknown. 2 mornings later, I found myself buttoning my worn navy blazer in front of the hall mirror, my reflection stiff with nerves. The crisp fall air bit at my cheeks as I walked the few blocks to the bank, briefcase in hand. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if my feet carried not just my weight but every unpaid bill, every looming deadline. I thought back to our conversation on the couch. "Let's talk about how we make it work." I had meant it. Yet now, standing before the glass doors of our local branch, I wondered if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Mr. Patel greeted me with a sympathetic smile. We settled into leather chairs in his small office. He shuffled through my paperwork, pay stubs, loan statements, a carefully prepared budget spreadsheet, then looked up, eyes gentle but firm. "Ethan, your credit history is excellent," he began, "but your debt-to-income ratio is already at 55%. Adding another dependent will only push it higher. Lenders typically assume at least $2,000 in monthly child-rearing costs." I swallowed hard, pressing my palms against the armrests. "Is there anything we can do?" I asked, voice tight. "Any program, any refinance option, even if it means restructuring everything?" He leaned forward, tapping my spreadsheet. "You could consolidate, but consolidation only slows the bleed. It doesn't make the bills disappear. Your current obligations leave very little room." He paused. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words felt like a verdict. I stood and shook his hand, forcing a polite smile as I gathered my papers. Outside, the sky had darkened to slate gray. A chilly wind whipped fallen leaves across the plaza. I walked back home with my head bowed, each discarded leaf like a hope dying at my feet. When I stepped through the front door, the warm scent of tomato basil soup drifted from the kitchen. Sophia looked up from the counter, her expression hopeful. I clenched my jaw. "I talked to Mr. Patel today," I said softly, setting the paperwork on the island. She wiped her hands on a tea towel. "And?" I took a breath. "He says we're stretched too thin. He can't help us." Her face fell, and for a moment the world went quiet except for the hum of the oven. Then she whispered, "So you won't?" "I want to," I interrupted, voice cracking. "But I'm terrified. Terrified I'll ruin everything we built." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought you believed in us." "I do," I pleaded. "But belief doesn't pay rent." Her shoulders shook as she turned away. In the dim kitchen light, I watched her retreat toward the stairs, her silhouette small and fragile. I stood alone amid the echo of our dreams, the cold paper still spread out like a map of every impossible choice. The next few weeks passed in a haze of exhaustion and quiet resentment. Sophia and I didn't argue, not in the loud, explosive way people do on television, but we drifted. Conversations were transactional. "Did you pay the gas bill? I'll pick up groceries after work. Can you take the trash out before Friday?" We were roommates wearing wedding rings, navigating the routines of life with the careful distance of 2 people avoiding landlines. I tried everything I could to shift the numbers. I picked up evening shifts at the warehouse near the edge of town, 4 hours after my day job, lugging crates and operating a pallet jack. On weekends, I drove for a rideshare app, ferrying people between the airport and downtown, listening to strangers laugh or argue while I stared blankly at the road ahead. My body ached. My mind was foggy. My marriage was fraying. Meanwhile, Sophia threw herself into cutting costs. She canceled our Netflix subscription. She switched to off-brand household cleaners. She clipped coupons, batch-cooked meals, and even sold a few of her designer handbags online. Every time I walked through the door and saw her hunched over the dining table with a calculator, my chest tightened. One night, I came home to find her crying softly in the bathroom. She didn't hear me at first. She was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, staring at an old photo of us from our honeymoon, young, glowing, full of dreams. When she noticed me standing in the doorway, she quickly wiped her eyes and turned away. "Were we ever really that happy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I knelt beside her, unsure what to say. Because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. A few days later, I got a message from my old friend, Jared. We hadn't spoken much since he moved to another city to run his own contracting business. He'd seen one of my Instagram stories, probably a photo Sophia had posted months ago of our newly painted nursery room, back when the baby talk still felt like a shared dream, not a source of dread. He asked, "Thinking of starting a family?" I stared at the screen for a full minute before typing. "She is. I'm just not sure we can afford it," he replied. "You'll never feel fully ready. But man, don't let money be the only thing that stops you. You'll figure it out. You always do." I almost laughed. Jared hadn't seen the stack of bills in our kitchen drawer. He hadn't seen Sophia's face go cold when I told her I was too tired to talk. He hadn't driven around at midnight hoping a surge rate might cover next month's electric bill. That night, Sophia and I sat on opposite sides of the couch again. I tried to reach for her hand, but she gently pulled away. "I miss us," she whispered. "I do too," I said. "Then why does it feel like we're falling apart?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I hesitated. "Because we built this life with hope, but we didn't build it with cushion. Every little thing feels like it could break us now." She nodded slowly, then said something that floored me. "Maybe we made the mistake of thinking comfort was the same thing as happiness." The next morning, I didn't go to the warehouse. I didn't turn on the rideshare app. I took the day off work and made Sophia breakfast, her favorite, sourdough toast with avocado and poached eggs. We sat in the kitchen in silence until she looked up at me. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I. I still want a baby." "I know," I said. "But I don't want to raise a child in a house where we're afraid to talk to each other." She looked at me for a long time, and for the first time in weeks, her eyes didn't look angry or disappointed. They looked like hers again. That afternoon, we made a list. Not of baby names or nursery colors. A list of every debt we owed. A brutally honest budget. Things we could sell. Subscriptions to cancel. Side gigs to explore. And then, we wrote a 6-month plan. Not to get rich. Just to stabilize. To make space for something more. We didn't solve everything that day. But we sat side by side again. We held hands again. We looked in the same direction again. And that, after weeks of silence and separate lives, felt like the most important first step. Sophia taped the 6-month plan to the refrigerator door like a declaration of war, neatly handwritten, underlined, with little check boxes beside every milestone. It was ambitious. Ruthless even. We would pay off the high-interest credit card first. Then we'd chip away at the car loan. No takeout. No vacations. Every purchase had to be agreed on. I even paused my gym membership and started running laps around the neighborhood with an old pair of sneakers that squeaked. At first, it felt empowering. Like we had wrestled back some control. We cooked together. We watched free documentaries online. On Fridays, instead of going out, we made popcorn and built forts in the living room like we were kids again. There were moments, real moments, when we laughed. When I thought, we're going to make it. But beneath the surface, the strain never fully disappeared. Sophia's sister invited us to a family dinner. Her husband had just landed a 6-figure promotion, and they were celebrating at an upscale restaurant downtown. Sophia declined politely, saying we had Other plans. I knew what she meant. We couldn't afford to show up. Not without feeling ashamed. Later that night, I found her scrolling through social media, eyes glazed over as she watched video after video of pregnancy announcements and baby room tours. "Don't do this to yourself," I said gently, wrapping an arm around her. "I can't help it," she murmured. "Everyone else is moving forward. We're just frozen." I didn't know what to say, so I held her. 1 week later, I came home from a 14-hour shift and found the house unusually quiet. The lights were off. No dinner simmering on the stove. No humming from Sophia in the kitchen. I walked upstairs, heart pounding. She wasn't in the bedroom. Not in the bathroom. Not in the guest room. But on the bed, I saw a note. Just a single sheet of paper, folded carefully in half. "Ethan, I love you. I really do. But I need to figure out if this version of life, the one we've been clawing through, is still one I can survive. I'm not giving up. I'm pressing pause. Please don't follow me. I need to remember who I was before the debt, before the fear, before I started waking up wondering if love was supposed to feel this hard. Sophia." My breath caught in my throat. The walls closed in. I called her phone. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. It felt like drowning in slow motion. I stood there, surrounded by everything we'd built. The house, the furniture, the framed wedding photo on the dresser, and it all felt meaningless without her. Like a castle made of sand that I had guarded so fiercely I hadn't realized it was already washing away. I sat down on the edge of the bed and wept. The next morning, I drove aimlessly until I saw the familiar yellow awning of the cafe where we'd had our first date. On a gut instinct, I pulled into the lot. She was there. Alone. Sitting at the corner booth, her fingers curled around a mug of black coffee, the same way she had that first night. I walked in, every nerve in my body screaming. She saw me, and for a moment, her face was unreadable. Then relief softened her features. I slid into the booth across from her. "You said not to follow you," I said quietly. "I did," she replied. "But I had to." She looked down. "I just needed space to breathe. I was losing myself in the struggle." "I know," I said. "So was I." There was a long silence. Then she whispered, "I feel like I'm mourning something that hasn't even happened." "A life we wanted?" I asked. She nodded. "A baby. A version of us that existed before bills and shifts and exhaustion." She paused. "Do you still want that? A family? With you?" I said. "Always." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Then let's find a new way. A real one." We sat for hours talking about the mistakes we made, the pressure we put on ourselves, the fear that led us to sacrifice connection for control. And by the end of that conversation, we didn't have all the answers, but we had each other again. We made a new plan. Not based on timelines or milestones, but on healing, rebuilding, choosing joy even in the struggle. We were far from perfect. But for the first time in months, we weren't frozen. We were moving forward. Together. The sun was rising when we returned home together. The sky outside was soft with pale gold and lavender streaks, like a quiet promise of something new. We stepped through the front door hand in hand, not speaking at first, just listening to the sound of our footsteps echoing through the still house. It no longer felt like a battlefield. Sophia wandered into the kitchen and touched the taped-up budget plan on the fridge. She didn't rip it down, but she took a pen and added a new header in bold letters. "For our future, not our fear." Over the next few months, things didn't magically get easier, but they got clearer. We didn't go back to scraping by just to keep up. We sold the second car, We cut the cable completely. We got rid of the fancy coffee machine and started brewing simple French press every morning together, like a little ritual. We gave up appearances so we could make room for intention. Our new plan didn't involve rushing toward parenthood just to catch up with everyone else. It involved building a foundation, stronger than our panic, quieter than our anxiety. One Saturday afternoon, I surprised Sophia with a picnic at the local park. It was the first warm day of spring, and we sat under a tree eating homemade sandwiches and laughing over silly memories. For the first time in a long while, I saw light in her eyes that wasn't forced. I saw her again. "You know what?" she said, stretching out on the blanket. "What?" I asked, lying back beside her. "I don't think I need a baby to feel whole," she said quietly. "I think I just needed to know we were still dreaming together, that our future wasn't shutting down." I turned to her, my heart swelling with a strange, peaceful ache. "We're still dreaming," I whispered. "Just differently now." 2 months later, we got unexpected news. I was promoted at work. Nothing huge, but enough to bump our income and finally take a chunk out of our debts. Sophia started designing digital planners on the side and opened a tiny Etsy shop. It took off slowly. But one night, as we reviewed her first week's orders, she grinned and said, "Look at us, starting something." I wrapped an arm around her and nodded. "We don't have to have everything figured out. We just have to keep choosing each other." She leaned into my chest and whispered, "I'm glad we didn't break." "So am I." 1 year later, we stood in front of a freshly painted nursery, not because we were pressured, not because the world said it was time, but because we had chosen it. On our terms. The walls were soft sage green. The crib was second-hand but sturdy. The mobile above it was handmade by Sophia herself. Little felt stars and clouds, sewn together on nights we spent listening to music and imagining what kind of world we wanted to raise a child in. As I held her from behind, my hands resting gently over her growing belly, I whispered, "We didn't just make room for a baby. We made room for us." She smiled, eyes glistening. "And that made all the difference." Because sometimes, love doesn't mean leaping blindly into the unknown. Sometimes it means learning to build a bridge first, together,